The sound of metal hitting metal rang through Tay's small repair shop. Night had fallen over New Sol Colony, but Tay was still working. He wiped sweat from his forehead and reached for another tool. The engine part he was fixing needed to be done by morning. New Sol was a forgotten place. Built on the edge of space where the Commonwealth and Dragon Empire fought their endless war, the colony barely survived. Most people here were just trying to live day by day, keeping their heads down. Tay liked it that way. His repair shop gave him enough to eat and a roof over his head. He didn't need much else. At 32, he had already seen enough of the galaxy's troubles to last a lifetime. A strange noise made him pause. It came from the back door, a scratching sound followed by something that sounded almost like a whimper. Tay put down his wrench and listened. The sound came again. Probably just another stray cat, he muttered to himself. The colony had plenty of them. Still, he walked to the door, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained work pants. The scratching grew more urgent. Tay unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, peering out into the dark alley behind his shop. What he saw made him freeze. Two small creatures huddled together on his doorstep. They were not cats. Their bodies were covered in scales that should have been bright purple but looked dull and dirty. Small wings were folded against their backs. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Large, intelligent eyes that looked up at him with unmistakable hunger and fear. Dragon hatchlings. Here in a human colony. Tay's heart raced. Everyone knew what dragons looked like, even if most humans never saw one in person. The Dragon Empire ruled half the galaxy. Their technology and powers far beyond human understanding. Their war with the Commonwealth had raged for decades, and helping enemy citizens, especially dragons, was punishable by death. The smaller hatchling made a chirping sound and took a shaky step forward. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, barely the size of a house cat. The slightly larger one stayed back, watching Tay with cautious eyes. "You two are a long way from home," Tay whispered, glancing nervously up and down the empty alley. No one was watching, but that didn't mean much. The Commonwealth had eyes everywhere. The smaller dragon chirped again, a sound so pitiful that Tay felt something twist in his chest. They were just babies, lost and hungry. How they had ended up here, he couldn't imagine. The nearest battle had been in the Orion sector, at least 2 jumps away. Tay knew what he should do. Report them immediately. The reward would be substantial, enough to buy a ticket off this rock and start fresh somewhere better. The Commonwealth would take the hatchlings and, well, he didn't want to think about what would happen after that. The larger hatchling seemed to sense his thoughts. It moved protectively in front of its smaller companion, a tiny wisp of smoke escaping from its nostrils. Even at this young age, it was trying to be brave. Ah, hell, Tay sighed, making a decision he knew he might regret. "Come on in, but be quiet about it." He opened the door wider and stepped back. The hatchlings hesitated, looking at each other as if communicating silently. Then, with surprising speed, they darted inside. Tay quickly shut the door and locked it. "Stay away from the windows," he told them, not sure if they could understand. "If anyone sees you..." The dragons moved deeper into his workshop, their claws clicking softly on the concrete floor. They looked around with obvious curiosity, sniffing at tools and spare parts. "You must be hungry," Tay said, watching them explore. "I don't have whatever it is dragons normally eat, but I've got some meat in the cooler upstairs." At the word meat, both hatchlings turned to him, their eyes brightening. The smaller one made an excited trill. "I'll take that as a yes," Tay said, almost smiling despite the danger of the situation. He went up the narrow stairs to his small apartment above the shop. His mind raced as he opened the cooler. What was he doing? Harboring enemy refugees, royal species no less, was insane. If they were found here, he wouldn't just be killed. He would be made an example of. But when he came back downstairs with a plate of raw meat, the sight of the 2 small dragons huddled together in the corner of his workshop pushed those thoughts away. They were just children, lost and afraid in a world that wanted them dead. "Here you go," he said, setting the plate on the floor and stepping back. The hatchlings approached cautiously. The larger one sniffed the meat first, then nodded to its companion. They fell upon the food with desperate hunger, making small sounds of satisfaction as they ate. Tay watched them, noticing details he had missed before. Their scales were damaged in places, showing signs of injury or illness. They were too thin for their size. and there was something about the pattern of their markings that seemed unusual, though he knew little about dragon physiology. "Where did you come from?" he asked softly. "How did you get here all alone?" The larger hatchling looked up from the now empty plate. For a moment, Tay felt something, a light touch against his mind like a question. Then it was gone. "You're telepathic," Tay realized. Adult dragons were known to communicate this way, but he hadn't expected it in one so young. "But you're too little to speak properly, aren't you?" The smaller dragon chirped and moved closer to him, its fear seemingly forgotten. It looked up at Tay with eyes that held more intelligence than any animal he had ever seen. "You can stay tonight," Tay told them, already knowing he was lying to himself. He couldn't just turn them out tomorrow. "I'll figure something out in the morning." He found an old storage crate and lined it with clean rags. The hatchlings climbed in without prompting, curling around each other for warmth. Within minutes they were asleep, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Tay sat on his work stool watching them sleep. What had he gotten himself into? Dragons lived for centuries. These two would grow larger, much larger. Hiding them would become impossible. But as he looked at their peaceful faces, he knew he couldn't regret his choice. Something about these two felt important, as if they had come to his door for a reason. "I'll call you Day," he whispered to the larger one. "And you," he said to the smaller, "will be Hana." Outside, the night patrol sirens began their usual rounds through the colony. Tay tensed, but the hatchling slept on, unaware of the danger. He would need to be careful, create a hiding place, figure out what they needed to stay healthy, learn more about dragons without raising suspicion. It would be difficult, perhaps impossible, but looking at the sleeping hatchlings, Tay felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of purpose. "We'll be okay," he promised them softly. Somehow. He couldn't have known then how this simple act of kindness would change not just his life but the course of the war itself. That feeding two hungry little dragons would one day bring the Empress's guard to his door. For now he simply watched over them as they slept. Two refugees from a world he barely understood, now under his protection. 2 years had passed since the night Tay found the dragon hatchlings at his door. What had begun as a temporary solution had become his life's secret mission. Day and Hana were no longer small enough to hide in a storage crate. They had grown to the size of large dogs, their purple scales now gleaming with health. Tay had converted the basement beneath his shop into their living space, reinforcing the walls and adding ventilation that wouldn't be noticed from outside. "Day, stop that," Tay said, watching the male dragon practice small bursts of flame near his workbench. "You'll set my tools on fire." "Sorry," came the reply directly into Tay's mind. The dragon's telepathic abilities had developed fully over the past year. They could now speak to him as clearly as any human, though only in his thoughts. Hana, the smaller female, looked up from the corner where she had been studying one of Tay's repair manuals. "He's just showing off again," she commented, her mental voice carrying a hint of amusement. Tay still found it strange sometimes, hearing their voices in his head. But it had made caring for them much easier. They could tell him what they needed, warn him of dangers, and most importantly, hide when necessary. "The monthly inspection is tomorrow," Tay reminded them, putting away his tools for the night. "You know the drill." Day huffed, a small puff of smoke escaping his nostrils. "Hide in the basement, stay quiet, mask our energy signatures. We know." "This isn't a game," Tay said firmly. "The patrols have been more frequent lately. Something's happening." Hana moved closer to him, her claws clicking softly on the concrete floor. "The war is getting worse," she said. "We can feel it. More dragons are dying." Tay frowned. The dragons had never spoken much about their kind or the war. He hadn't pushed them, thinking they were too young to understand or remember. But lately, he had noticed them growing more solemn when news of battles came through the colony's information network. "How do you know that?" he asked, kneeling to look Hana in the eyes. The dragons exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We just know," Day said finally. "All dragons are connected, even from far away." Tay nodded slowly. There was still so much about dragons that humans didn't understand, or that the Commonwealth didn't share with ordinary citizens. "Well, connected or not, you need to be extra careful tomorrow," he said, standing up. I've heard rumors that they're bringing in new scanning equipment, something that can detect non-human life forms. Both dragons stiffened, their wings twitching with anxiety. Will your shields hold? Hana asked. Tay patted the device attached to the basement ceiling. It was his own invention, cobbled together from spare parts and information he had carefully gathered over the years. The shield generated a field that masked the dragon's unique energy signatures, making them appear as nothing more than electrical equipment to most scanners. They should, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I made some improvements last week. That night, after the dragons had gone to sleep in their basement home, Tay sat at his small kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea. The danger was growing. As Day and Hana got bigger, hiding them became harder, and if the Commonwealth was developing better detection technology, it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. He had considered leaving the colony, taking the dragons somewhere remote where they could live freely. But interstellar travel required documentation, and the borders were heavily monitored. They would never make it past the checkpoints. A soft scratching at the floor told him one of the dragons had come up through the hidden hatch he had built between the basement and his apartment. You should be sleeping, he said without turning around. Hana moved into view, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. I felt your worry, she said. It woke me. Tay sighed. The emotional connection between them had grown stronger too. Sometimes the dragons knew what he was feeling before he did. I'm just thinking about the future, he admitted. You two keep growing. Soon you won't fit in the basement anymore. Hana settled beside him, her warm body leaning against his leg. We could slow our growth, she offered. It would be painful, but possible. No, Tay said firmly. I won't let you hurt yourselves. We'll find another way. You've done so much for us, Hana said, her mental voice gentle, more than anyone would have expected. Tay reached down to stroke her scales, feeling the smooth warmth beneath his fingers. Anyone would have done the same. No, Hana replied with certainty. They wouldn't have. Humans fear what they don't understand. Dragons do too. And yet here we are, Tai said with a small smile. A human and two dragons, living together like some strange family. Hana made a soft trilling sound that Tay had come to recognize as laughter. We are family, she said simply. The next morning came too quickly. Tay rose before dawn to prepare for the inspection. He checked the shield generator twice, made sure all signs of the dragons were hidden, and rehearsed his answers to any questions the patrol might ask. Remember, stay absolutely quiet, he told Day and Hana as they settled into the basement. No matter what happens. We will, Day promised, his usual playfulness gone. Be careful, Tay. Tay sealed the hidden entrance and went to open his shop as if it were any normal day. He had just started working on an engine when the patrol arrived. 4 Commonwealth officers in their gray uniforms, led by Captain Min. Routine inspection, Min announced, though his eyes were sharper than usual. We have reports of unusual activity in this sector. What kind of activity? Tay asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Unauthorized communications, Min said, watching Tay's face closely. Possibly with enemy forces. Tay kept his expression neutral. Well, you won't find any of that here. Just engines and spare parts. Min nodded to his officers, who began scanning the shop with their equipment. One of them carried a new device Tai hadn't seen before, smaller than the usual scanners, with a pulsing blue light. New tech? Tay asked casually, his heart pounding. Latest from Central, Min confirmed. Can detect energy signatures through most shielding. Tay felt cold fear wash over him. Would his homemade shield hold against this new technology? He fought to keep his breathing steady as the officer moved toward the area above the basement. The scanner beeped softly. The officer frowned, adjusting something on the device. Problem? Min asked. Some kind of interference, the officer replied. Might be all the machinery in here. Tay held his breath. Below his feet, he knew Day and Hana would be pressed together, using their combined abilities to dampen their presence. The officer moved the scanner again, then shook his head. Nothing clear, just background noise. Min looked disappointed but nodded. Check his living quarters. While the officers went upstairs, Min stayed behind, looking around the workshop with renewed interest. You've done well for yourself, Tay, he said. Shop's bigger than when you started. Hard work pays off, Tay replied, trying to sound normal. Indeed. Min picked up a tool, examining it. You know, there's been talk about dragon refugees slipping through our borders. Younglings, mostly. Survivors from the battles in Orion. Tay's mouth went dry. Is that so? Dangerous situation. Dragons may look harmless when they're small, but they grow, and they remember who their enemies are. Min set the tool down. Anyone harboring such creatures would be committing high treason. Good thing I just work with engines, then, Tay said. Min's eyes met his. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then the other officers returned from upstairs. All clear, sir, one reported. Min nodded slowly, still watching Tay. Very well, we'll be on our way. But we'll be back, mechanic. The new scanners need calibration. Might take a few visits to get them working properly. After they left, Tay waited a full hour before opening the basement entrance. Day and Hana looked up at him, their eyes wide with fear. They know, Tay said quietly. Not for certain, but they suspect. What will we do? Hana asked. Tay sat heavily on the bottom step. I don't know, but we can't stay here much longer. Day moved forward, his larger form now almost reaching Tay's chest when he stood tall. There's something we need to tell you, he said, exchanging a look with his sister. Something we should have told you long ago. It's about who we are, Hana added, and why the Commonwealth wants to find dragons like us so badly. Tay looked between them, suddenly understanding that the two dragons he had raised were far more than simple refugees. His simple act of kindness had entangled him in something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Tell me everything, he said. Tay sat on an old crate in the basement, trying to process what Day and Hana had just told him. The dragons watched him anxiously, their tails twitching back and forth. Let me get this straight, Tay said slowly. You're not just any dragons. You're royal dragons. From the imperial family. Yes, Hana confirmed. We are clutch siblings to the Empress herself. Clutch siblings? Tay asked. Born from the same hatching cycle, Day explained. In your terms, we would be the Empress's younger siblings. Tay ran a hand through his hair, feeling overwhelmed. For 3 years he had been hiding 2 members of the Dragon Empire's royal family in his basement. The penalty for that wouldn't just be death. It would be a very public, very painful death. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked, unable to keep the hurt from his voice. The dragons exchanged glances again, that silent communication that always made Tay feel slightly left out. We were afraid, Hana admitted. Not of you, but for you. If you had known who we were, Tay continued, the Commonwealth's telepathic scanners might have picked it up from your thoughts. We were too young to help shield your mind. And now? Tay asked. Now we are stronger, Hana said. We can protect your thoughts from casual scanning, but the new equipment they're bringing. It might be too powerful, Tay finished for her. He stood up and began pacing the small basement. So the transport that was attacked in the Orion sector, the one I heard about on the news feeds, that was you? Yes, Day confirmed. We were being moved to a safer Imperial world. The Commonwealth forces attacked our ship. It wasn't random, they knew who was on board. An assassination attempt, Tay said, the pieces falling into place. They wanted to kill royal dragons to hurt the Empire. Our guards put us in an escape pod, Hana said, her mental voice growing sad. They died protecting us. The pod's navigation system was damaged in the battle. We drifted for weeks before landing near your colony. And you found your way to my door, Tay murmured. Of all the places you could have ended up, we sensed kindness in you, Day said simply. Even as hatchlings, dragons can feel the emotions of others. You were sad and lonely, but your heart was good. Tay stopped pacing and looked at them. They had grown so much from the tiny, frightened creatures he had found at his door. Day's shoulders now reached Tay's chest, his wingspan too large to fully extend in the basement. Hana was slightly smaller but more agile, her scales a deeper purple with intricate patterns that Tay now realized must signify her royal status. "Does the Empire know you're alive?" he asked. "We think so," Hana said. "As we've grown stronger, our telepathic range has increased. About a month ago, we were able to briefly touch the Imperial network, the mental connection all dragons share." "You've been calling for help," Tay realized, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. "That's what the Commonwealth is detecting. The unauthorized communications they mentioned." Day lowered his head. "We had to try. If the Empire believes we're dead, the war will only get worse. The Empress loved us dearly." Tay sank back down onto the crate. "So what happens now? If you've contacted the Empire, will they come for you?" "Yes," Hana said. "But not right away. They must be careful. If they move too obviously, the Commonwealth will know we're here and might try to capture or kill us first." "And what about me?" Tay asked quietly. "When the Empire comes, what happens to the human who hid you?" The dragons moved closer, pressing against him from both sides. Their warm scales were comforting, despite the dire situation. "You saved our lives," Day said firmly. "In dragon culture, that creates a life debt that can never be broken. The Empire will honor that." "I hope you're right," Tay said, not entirely convinced. He had heard too many stories about the Dragon Empire's ruthlessness to fully believe they would spare one insignificant human mechanic. "We need to prepare," Hana said, changing the subject. "The Commonwealth will return with better scanners, and we're still growing. Our 5th year approaches." "What happens in your 5th year?" Tay asked. "The final growth stage," Day explained. "We will nearly double in size over a few days. It's when young dragons reach maturity." Tay looked around the basement in alarm. "You can't double in size. There's barely enough room for you now." "We know," Hana said. "That's why we had to contact the Empire. We must leave before then." Tay stood up again, his mind racing. "We need a better plan than just waiting. If the Commonwealth comes back with improved scanners before the Empire reaches us, we're all dead." "What do you suggest?" Day asked. "We need to move you," Tay decided. "Not far, I can't get you off planet, but somewhere less obvious than my shop. Somewhere they've already searched and won't look again soon." "The old mining tunnels," Hana suggested. "We've seen them in your memories. They run beneath the colony." Tay nodded slowly. "That could work. They're abandoned now, and the Commonwealth doesn't patrol them regularly because of the radiation risks." "Radiation doesn't affect dragons the same way it affects humans," Day said. "We would be safe there." "I'll need to prepare supplies," Tay said, already making mental lists. "Food, water, some basic tools. And I'll need to find a way to move you there without being seen." "We can help with that," Hana said. "Our camouflage abilities are developing. We can't maintain them for long, but enough to move quickly at night." Tay looked at them with surprise. "You never mentioned you could camouflage yourselves." "There are many things about dragons humans don't know," Day said, a hint of pride in his mental voice. "It's how we've survived so long against your weapons." Over the next few days, Tay prepared carefully. He gathered supplies and stored them in waterproof containers. He studied old maps of the mining tunnels, finding a section that was stable and had access to underground water. He created a new portable version of his shield generator that could be powered by the dragon's own energy. All the while, he kept his shop running normally, fixing engines and serving customers as if nothing was wrong. Captain Min returned once with his new scanner, but Tai had been ready. He had modified parts of his shop to emit low-level interference that would confuse the device without seeming suspicious. "Still getting strange readings," Min had said, frowning at his scanner. "But nothing clear enough to warrant a full search. Must be all the metal and electrical equipment," Tay had suggested innocently. "This place is full of things that could interfere with sensitive instruments." Min had given him a long, hard look before leaving. "We'll be watching this area closely, mechanic. Very closely." On the 5th night after the dragons had revealed their true identity, Tay decided it was time to move. The Commonwealth patrols had established a pattern, and there would be a gap of about 20 minutes between sweeps of his sector. Tonight, he told Day and Hannah as he brought them their evening meal. We'll leave at exactly midnight. Are you sure about this? Hannah asked, concern in her mental voice. If you're caught helping us escape? I'm already guilty of treason, Ty said with a grim smile. Might as well commit a little more. As midnight approached, Tay packed the last of his supplies into a large repair bag. He had told his neighbors he would be gone for a few days, visiting a sick relative in another part of the colony. It wasn't much of a cover story, but it would have to do. Ready? He asked the dragons, who waited tensely by the basement door. Ready, they replied in unison. Tay opened the door and peered out into the dark workshop. All was quiet. He signaled to the dragons, and they moved silently up the stairs, their claws wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. Now, Day said, and both dragons seemed to shimmer slightly, their purple scales taking on the darker colors of their surroundings. It wasn't perfect invisibility. Tay could still see their outlines if he looked carefully, but in the darkness, it would be enough to hide them from casual observation. Let's go, Tay whispered, opening the back door of his shop. Together they slipped out into the night, unaware that their every move was being watched by eyes far more dangerous than the Commonwealth Patrol. The night air was cool as Tay led the dragons through the back alleys of New Sol Colony. They moved quickly but carefully, staying in the shadows. Day and Hannah maintained their camouflage, their forms blending with the darkness around them. Almost there, Tay whispered, checking his small map. The entrance to the old mining tunnels was hidden behind an abandoned processing plant at the edge of the colony. A sudden noise made them freeze. Footsteps, coming closer. Tay pressed himself. Against a wall, the dragons doing the same on either side of him. A patrol officer walked past the alley entrance, his scanner beeping softly. For a heart-stopping moment, the officer paused, looking in their direction. Tay held his breath. Beside him, he could feel Day and Hannah focusing their mental energy to strengthen their camouflage. The scanner beeped again, drawing the officer's attention elsewhere. With a final glance down the alley, he moved on. That was close. Day's voice touched Tay's mind. Too close, Tay agreed quietly. Let's keep moving. They reached the abandoned processing plant without further incident. The building was a hulking shadow against the night sky, its metal walls rusted and crumbling. A chain-link fence surrounded it, topped with old warning signs about radiation. The fence is just for show, Tay explained as they approached. The radiation levels dropped years ago, but the Commonwealth keeps the warnings up to discourage people from exploring. Smart of you to choose this place, Hannah commented. Fear keeps humans away better than locks. Tay found the gap in the fence he had discovered during his preparations. It was barely large enough for him to squeeze through, and he worried the dragons might not fit. But Day and Hannah were surprisingly flexible, their bodies seeming to flow through the opening with ease. This way, Tay said, leading them toward a rusted door at the back of the building. Inside, the processing plant was a maze of old machinery and collapsed walkways. Tay's small light showed the way as they navigated through the ruins. The air smelled of metal and dust. The tunnel entrance is below the main floor, Tay explained. There should be a maintenance shaft that leads down to it. They found the shaft hidden behind a fallen section of wall. It was a dark hole in the floor with a rusted ladder leading down into blackness. I'll go first, Tay said, shining his light into the depths. Follow when I call. The ladder creaked under his weight, but held. Tay descended slowly, counting the rungs. At 30, his feet touched solid ground. He moved his light around, revealing a narrow concrete tunnel stretching in both directions. All clear, he called up softly. Come down. The dragons descended one after the other, their claws finding easy purchase on the metal rungs. In the confined space of the tunnel, they seemed even larger than before. This way, Tay said, pointing to the right. According to the old maps, this tunnel runs for about 2 kilometers before connecting to a larger chamber. That's where we'll set up. They walked in silence, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Tay's light showed abandoned mining equipment and fallen support beams. The air grew cooler and damper the further they went. There's water nearby, Hana noted, lifting her head to sniff the air. Fresh water, not stagnant. Good, Tay said. The maps showed an underground spring, but I wasn't sure if it was still flowing. After nearly an hour of walking, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. Tay's light couldn't reach the ceiling, but it revealed a space big enough for the dragons to move comfortably. A small pool of clear water filled one corner, fed by a trickle coming from the rock wall. This is it, Tay said, setting down his bag. Home for now. It's perfect, Day said, stretching his wings for the first time since they left the shop. The wingspan was impressive, nearly 5 meters from tip to tip. Tay set up the portable shield generator near the center of the chamber. This should mask your energy signatures from any scanners they might bring down here, but try not to use your fire or telepathy unless necessary. Those create stronger signals that might break through. How long will we need to stay here? Hana asked, exploring the chamber's perimeter. I don't know, Tay admitted. Until the Empire contacts you again, or until I can find a better solution. And you? Day asked. Will you stay with us? Tay shook his head. I can't. I need to maintain my normal routine or they'll get suspicious. But I'll come every night with food and news. The dragons looked unhappy about this, but didn't argue. They understood the danger. Tay spent the next few hours setting up a small living area for them. He unpacked food, water containers, and some basic comforts. Blankets that the dragons probably didn't need but that made the cold chamber feel less alien. I should get back, he said finally, checking the time. Dawn will break soon and I need to open the shop as usual. Be careful, Hana said, pressing her head against his shoulder in a gesture of affection. The Commonwealth officers are not fools. I know, Tay said, patting her scales. I'll be back tonight. Stay hidden, stay quiet. The walk back through the tunnels seemed longer without the dragons beside him. Tay's mind was full of worries. How long could they stay hidden? What if the Empire never came? What if the Commonwealth found them first? When he reached the ladder, he paused to listen for any sounds from above. Hearing nothing, he climbed up and emerged into the abandoned processing plant. The first light of dawn was visible through the broken windows. Tay made his way back to his shop, taking a different route than the one they had used during the night. The colony was beginning to wake up, a few early workers already on the streets. He nodded to them casually, trying to look like someone returning from an early morning walk. He had just reached his shop when he noticed something wrong. The door was slightly ajar, though he was certain he had locked it before leaving. Tay approached cautiously, his hand reaching for the small tool knife he kept in his pocket. Pushing the door open slowly, he peered inside. The shop looked normal at first glance. Tools in their places, engines and parts where he had left them. But as his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw a figure sitting calmly at his workbench. Captain Min. Good morning, mechanic, Min said, his voice conversational. Early start today? Tay forced himself to remain calm. Just getting some fresh air before work. What brings you here, Captain? Min smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Interesting readings on our scanners last night. Energy signatures moving through the colony, not human signatures. Tay's heart pounded, but he kept his face neutral. Is that so? Maybe your new equipment is still malfunctioning. Maybe, Min agreed. Or maybe something or someone left this area around midnight. He stood up, walking slowly around the workbench. The strange thing is, the signatures disappeared completely, as if they vanished from the colony. Sounds like a technical problem to me, Tay said with a shrug. I'm just a mechanic, Captain. I fix engines, not scanners. Min stopped directly in front of Tay. We searched your shop while you were out, very thoroughly this time. Tay felt cold fear wash over him. Had they found evidence of the dragons? Some scales, perhaps, or claw marks they had missed? And? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Nothing, Min admitted, looking slightly frustrated. Not a trace of anything unusual, which is itself unusual. No shop is this clean. Relief flooded through Tay, but he didn't let it show. I like to keep my workspace organized. Makes finding tools easier. Min studied his face for a long moment. The Commonwealth is bringing in a special investigator tomorrow, someone with more sensitive equipment and special abilities. A telepath, Tay realized with a jolt of fear. Among other things, Min said with a thin smile. They'll be checking every building, every person in the colony, no exceptions. He moved toward the door, then paused. Whatever you're hiding, mechanic, whoever you're hiding, they'll find it. And when they do. He left the threat unspoken. After Min left, Tay sank onto a stool, his legs suddenly weak. A Commonwealth telepath would find the truth in his mind, no matter how carefully he tried to hide it. And they would find Day and Hana, even with the shield generator. He had until tomorrow to come up with a new plan. But what could he possibly do against the full might of the Commonwealth? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a strange sensation touched his mind, different from Day and Hana's familiar presence. It was more powerful, more ancient. Be ready, the unknown voice whispered in his thoughts. We are coming. Tay worked through the day in a daze, his mind racing. The strange voice that had touched his thoughts hadn't returned, but its message echoed in his head. Be ready. We are coming. Was it the Empire? Had they finally located Day and Hana? Or was it a trick? The Commonwealth telepath testing him from a distance. As evening approached, Tay prepared to visit the dragons. He packed food and fresh water, trying to act normal in case anyone was watching. The colony seemed unusually quiet, the streets emptier than normal. People could sense something was happening, even if they didn't know what. Just as Tay was about to leave his shop, the ground trembled beneath his feet. A low rumble filled the air, growing louder by the second. He rushed outside and looked up. The sky was filled with ships, massive black vessels with purple markings glowing along their hulls. Imperial ships, 3 of them, descending through the colony's atmosphere with impossible grace for their size. Colony alarms began to blare. In the distance, Tay could hear the Commonwealth defense systems activating, a futile gesture against the might of the Dragon Empire. They're here, he whispered to himself, a mix of relief and fear washing over him. People poured into the streets, pointing up at the ships in terror. Some ran for shelter while others stood frozen in place. Commonwealth officers rushed about, shouting orders and trying to organize a defense. Tay knew he should run to the tunnels, warn Dai and Hana, but something told him to wait. The voice had said to be ready, not to hide. The largest ship descended toward the colony's central square, its massive shadow darkening several blocks. The other 2 remained in the air, hovering protectively. As the ship neared the ground, its engines quieted to a soft hum. A ramp extended from its side, touching down on the square's pavement. Tay found himself moving toward the square, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. Around him, people were running in the opposite direction, but he pushed against the flow. By the time he reached the edge of the square, a group of Commonwealth officers had formed a defensive line, their weapons aimed at the ship's ramp. Captain Min stood at their center, his face pale but determined. Hold your positions, Min ordered. No one fires without my command. From the darkness of the ship's interior, movement appeared. 6 massive forms emerged onto the ramp, adult dragons, each one at least 3 times larger than Day and Hana. Their scales gleamed with a deep purple that seemed to absorb the light around them. They wore armor made of a material Tay had never seen before, etched with glowing symbols. The lead dragon, bearing markings that identified him as a captain, stepped forward. His telepathic voice boomed across the square, audible to everyone present. People of New Sol Colony, I am Captain Sook of the Imperial Guard. We come by order of Her Imperial Majesty, the Dragon Empress. The Commonwealth officers shifted nervously, their weapons looking small and useless against the massive creatures. Captain Min stepped forward, his voice remarkably steady. This is Commonwealth territory. Your presence here is an act of war. Captain Sook's massive head turned toward Min, regarding him with ancient eyes. If we wished for war, human, your colony would already be ash. We come for what is ours. There is nothing of yours here, Min replied, but his voice wavered slightly. The dragon captain's gaze swept the square, then settled directly on Tay, who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. Tay, mechanic of New Sol Colony. The dragon's voice spoke directly into his mind. Step forward. A murmur ran through the crowd. People turned to look at Tay, confusion and fear on their faces. The Commonwealth officers swiveled their weapons toward him. "Don't move," Min shouted. "That's an order." But Tay found himself walking forward anyway, his legs moving almost of their own accord. He stopped halfway between the Commonwealth line and the Imperial dragons. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice sounding small in the vast square. Captain Sook lowered his massive head, bringing his eyes level with Tay's. "We know many things, human. We know of your shop at the edge of the colony. We know of the 2 young dragons you found at your door 5 years ago. We know you fed them when they were hungry, sheltered them when they were in danger, and loved them when they were alone." Gasps and cries of shock came from the crowd. Captain Min's face contorted with rage. "Traitor!" he shouted, raising his weapon. "You've been harboring enemy refugees." Before Min could fire, one of the Imperial dragons moved with shocking speed, placing himself between Tay and the Commonwealth officers. The other dragons fanned out, their postures clearly protective. "The human Tai is under Imperial protection," Captain Sook announced. "Any harm to him will be considered an act of war against the Dragon Empire." Tay stood stunned, unable to believe what was happening. "The dragons," he said urgently. "Dee and Hana, they're hidden in the old mining tunnels. The Commonwealth knows about them now. They'll send people to find them." "We are aware," Captain Sook replied, a hint of amusement in his mental voice. "They are already safe." As if on cue, 2 familiar forms emerged from the ship, Day and Hana walking proudly down the ramp. But they looked different. Their scales gleamed with a brilliance Tay had never seen before, and they moved with a new confidence. Most shocking of all, they had grown significantly, now nearly the size of young adults. Hana's joyful voice filled his mind as she rushed toward him. "We felt them coming. The Imperial fleet reached out to us telepathically and guided us out of the tunnels. They came for us through the old mine shaft," Day added, his mental voice stronger than Tay had ever heard it. "We wanted to warn you, but there wasn't time." The dragons stopped on either side of Tay, their large bodies dwarfing his human form. To the watching crowd, it must have looked bizarre, a simple mechanic standing between 2 royal dragons as if he belonged there. Captain Min looked from the dragons to Tay, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "You've been hiding them all this time? Right under our noses?" "They were just children," Tay said simply. "They needed help." Captain Sook stepped forward again. "The Royal Clutch siblings have told us everything, human Tay. You saved them when their transport was attacked. You protected them from those who would harm them. You treated them with kindness when you could have turned them in for reward." The massive dragon lowered his head in a formal bow that sent another shockwave of murmurs through the watching crowd. "By the ancient laws of our kind, you are owed a life debt that can never be repaid. The Empress herself wishes to express her gratitude." Tay felt dizzy with the unreality of it all. "I just did what seemed right," he said. "What seemed right," the dragon captain repeated, a note of wonder in his telepathic voice. Such a simple concept, yet one that eludes so many across our warring galaxies. He rose to his full height, addressing the entire colony. "For 5 years we have searched for the lost Royal Clutch. For 5 years we have waged war against the Commonwealth, believing they had captured or killed our kin. And all this time they were saved and sheltered by a single human who simply did what seemed right." The Commonwealth officers looked at each other uncertainly. The crowd had fallen completely silent. "Human Tay," Captain Sook continued, "the Empress requests your presence. Will you come with us?" Tay looked at Day and Hana, the 2 dragons he had raised from frightened hatchlings to proud young adults. They had become his family, his purpose. "What will happen to me?" he asked. "By Imperial law, one who saves royal blood is owed a boon of equal value," Hana explained. "The Empress wishes to grant you whatever you desire." Tay thought of his small shop, his lonely life before the dragons had come into it. Then he thought of the war, the countless lives lost on both sides. "If I come with you," he said slowly, "can I ask for anything?" "Anything within the Empress's power to grant," Captain Sook confirmed. Tay nodded, his decision made. "Then I'll come." The Imperial dragons formed a protective circle around Tai, Day, and Hana as they walked toward the ship. The Commonwealth officers, outnumbered and outmatched, could only watch. Captain Min called out as they reached the ramp. "What about the colony? Are you just going to leave us in peace?" Captain Sook turned his massive head. That depends on what boon the human Tai requests of the Empress. I suggest you hope for his continued kindness. As they entered the ship, Tai felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For 5 years, he had lived in fear, protecting his secret. Now, walking between Day and Hana toward a future he could never have imagined, he felt something new. Hope. We told you they were coming for us all, Hana reminded him, a touch of amusement in her telepathic voice. Tai smiled, placing one hand on each of their scaled shoulders. 5 years ago, he had simply opened his door to 2 hungry refugees. Now he stood at the threshold of a new era for 2 civilizations. Sometimes, the most profound changes began with the simplest acts of kindness. As the ship's ramp closed behind them and the engines hummed to life, Tai knew his journey was just beginning. The Empress was waiting, and he had a request to make, one that might change the course of the war itself.